welcome to Adaptation Station. I'm your host, Kat Averill, and this is episode 2, Great Responsibility. No prizes for guessing what our topic is today.
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound.
So in the last video, we talked about how transformative works and adaptations spoke to which narratives we as a culture want to keep repeating. If you'll recall, we touched on how the bankability of a certain narrative might play into that cycle, particularly in the film industry. But, culture producers figure that if you pay for it once, you'll pay for it again, right? So this principle becomes even more interesting when applied to not just reproducing a certain narrative in different mediums, but continuing it in different mediums. Sequels, prequels, midquels, spin-offs, sustaining and reproducing narratives in multiple mediums, often at the same time. In short, franchises. Chiefly film franchises, I'll admit. But where there is a successful film franchise, aka a sign that a certain narrative is cash money in the form of a return on one of the largest investments possible to make in a narrative. Anyway, where there's a successful film franchise, there's often, novels, comics, spin-off TV series, and legions of fans who are interpreting and parodying and riffing and in many other ways creating in a heavy dialogue with the text as it's presented in all of its forms. So what makes a successful film franchise, one worthy of being proliferated and profited from? A crossover hit, as it's often called, since many times the work in question is a genre work, a sci-fi or fantasy or in some other way high concept. Isn't it funny that the franchises that often have the most enduring and widespread appeal come from areas of culture that are considered too fringe or niche? I think it's because often the most successful franchises have an engaging, highly detailed setting that differs fantastically from our own. One that offers not just passive escapism, but active participation in an alternate world. These franchises have what I like to call points of insertion. Customizable aspects of a world's unique mythology that allows a reader to envision themselves within that world, a categorization or attribute that the reader or viewer believes represents them as a person in the context of the text. One of the best examples of a point of insertion is the Hogwarts house sorting from Harry Potter. For my generation, what's your house is quickly becoming a replacement for what's your sign. But there are plenty in modern pop culture. Your lightsaber color, your Esper title, your element, what captain you'd serve under, your Westerosi house and sigil and words, or what breed of supernatural creature you'd be in any of the plethora of supernatural books, movies, and TV series nowadays. Points of insertion are selling points. They not only sell the world to the person engaging with the text, but they also quite literally sell goods. All of these different fictional agencies have attendant iconography, which makes for good merchandise, which makes for a bankable franchise, which makes for, you guessed it, more adaptations. A really good example of everything I'm talking about here is a recent renaissance that involves a lot of high-profile new representations of one of the oldest and most constant cornerstones of our national modern mythology, a ever-expanding world with an eternally flexible cosmology that allows us to confront some of the most human problems, the very basis of our nature, in extraordinary characters and circumstances. I'm talking about superheroes.
I know, right?
Of all our modern myths, the superhero concept is one of our most varied and numerous. It involves decades of individuals contemplating common problems through uncommon lenses. Power and pageantry abound in the superhero world, but the basic questions remain. Who am I? Why am I here? What is right? Does the ability to act mean that I have the right or the duty to act? How will I choose between duty and the people I care for? Does alien blood come out of spandex on the delicate cycle? But superheroes don't just represent an individual contemplating life's constant uncertainties. They also respond to contemporary social issues and anxieties. Like, say, modern runs of the X-Men that are meant to parallel queer closeted struggles, or the, Nazi fighting heroes in the World War II era comics, or the Cold War comics that are all about Russian spies and the threat of nuclear war. In fact, the very first appearance of Superman in Action Comics in 1938, there he was, created as a bold humanist response to Depression-era fears of runaway scientific advance and soulless industrialism from Grant Morrison's Supergods. Superheroes are supposed to be a manifestation of the potential of mankind. I mean, it's not all just lifting heavy things and being able to go wherever you want and burn stuff with your eyes. I mean, the power fantasy is one thing, it's just cool to see all this stuff working and, wish you could do stuff like that. But more than that, it's about what they do with the power. Superheroes are just people who chose to do good for others. They really just choose to, be on the front lines of upholding what's good for other people, even though they have all this awesome power at their fingertips they could use for bad, like the villains do. They use it for good instead, and good is what wins. And that's a really nice thing to read about. Especially, when things are so cynical nowadays. When they're struggling with all these, common problems and contemporary issues, and you're right there along with them and seeing how they think and feel about these things, it reminds you that no matter how, saintly they are or how powerfully godlike they are, they're not that much different than you. And that can make you realize that, hey, you're not that much different from them. You're capable of great things too. I think that's one of the reasons why superhero stories are so dear to us, even though they haven't always been the most inclusive of mediums. People still relate to this message that they have and, the fun way they have of going about saying it. So, even now, as the comic industry works through its problems like that, like, say, the recent fire it's come under, rightfully, for its, sexualization and, underrepresentation of female characters, people still are fans of it and are able to engage in a dialogue with these works that they love and, try to change it, but can still appreciate it. Like the Hawkeye Initiative, you should really check that out. That's a good one. And that's one of the greatest things, I think, about how we interact and as we reproduce our modern mythology in this day and age. That's why modern mythology is important. These are the stories that we use to not only tell about and represent our society, it's how we use them to change our society too. One tightly sculpted Jeremy Renner's butt at a time. So when you string all these compelling aspects of superhero stories together, you get canons that span decades and form a rich tapestry of America as seen through a domino mask, which are those little over-the-eye mask things. Familiar characters get reworked, updated, and upgraded. Even though they'll maintain, their recognizable self, both physically and as a character, they can get new outfits, new powers, even, new worldviews as the creator and the world that they spring from change. And you get to experience the changing world right along with them. There is no more engaging and customizable point of insertion than the concept of a superhero as a whole. Think about it. If you were a superhero, what would your costume look like? What would your colors be? What would your powers be? Strength, flight, invisibility? Would you be an alien or a mutant or the product of an experiment gone wrong? What team would you be on? Would you be on the X-Men, the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, the Runaways? So yeah, superheroes populate some of our most long-standing, essential, and accessible narratives. But for a long time, comic book superheroes were considered too genre, too niche for the mainstream, all evidence to the contrary. That is, until the adaptations started rolling in. Sort of. You see, one of the interesting things about comics is, right when they were first gaining a lot of their popularity, they kind of caught a bad rap. In 1948, Frederick Wertham, a psychologist who did a lot of work with, at-risk youths in that time, decided that because all of the young hooligans he worked with, tended to like comics and have them around all the time, he decided that that must be the cause of their delinquency because, he was absent the day they talked about correlation versus causation. But anyway, so he started preaching about the depravity of comics, inciting the youth to violence and sexual perversion, etc., etc., etc. Same old story. So, a lot of people, rose up against comics, and there was kind of a lot of moral backlash until the Comics Code was made in 1954, which is sort of like the Hays Code of comics, which really restricted the sort of things that one could put in a comic book if they wanted, the seal of approval. And if they didn't have the seal of approval, then they probably wouldn't sell very well. So there became kind of this paradoxical association in which comic books were unsuitable for young people and yet still considered something somewhat childish, which is something that persists in shades today, too young for adults, too old for kids. So, that's a difficulty that they've had to face. And in addition to that, nowadays especially, comics have really long canons that can, people don't want to deal with when trying to catch up. And it can be an expensive habit, buying all of this stuff. Comics cost money because, they're art. But like many stories that come from less accessible media, a good TV or film adaptation can do wonders for a superhero story. I mean, you take decades of canon and streamline the story, dress it up in accessible visuals, and, send it out to a wider base audience. And comic canons in particular are filled with resets and alternate timelines and alternate worlds and contradictions and take-backsies, and it's really confusing. Because of this, TV series is a really good option for adaptations of superhero stories to take, because it's a lot longer period of time over which to disseminate this information. So there were a lot of early TV stories around the time that all this hoopla was happening with the comics and they were trying to regain respectability. So the TV series were aimed at kids and they could come into people's homes and, see the upstanding Superman just saving damsels and small children and things. And then, of course, classic titles got their fair share of movies in time, although a lot of them weren't really taken all that seriously. See George Clooney's turn as a Batman. But the 2000s saw a rise in the serious superhero movie, which particularly included a bent towards the gritty reboot for the franchises, although they still didn't want to lose their young audience. Gotta keep selling the toys, right? But the superhero genre has really grown in films nonetheless. I mean, Marvel's new ambitious shared universe has reached 7 movies and counting this weekend, and according to Box Office Mojo, has made almost $2 billion, and that's before this weekend's Iron Man 3 opening. And it'll only grow from there. The rest of their Stage 2 movies after Iron Man 3 includes a follow-up to Captain America, the Captain America Winter Soldier, and a sequel to The Avengers, and Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man. But no runaways. And so, of course, with this whole super renaissance going on, people from all corners of the internet are clamoring with new suggestions, wanting to have their favorites put forth and promoted and immortalized in living color. The boards are abuzz with casting suggestions from every direction, and despite any recent prospects, the list of Wonder Woman candidates remains as long as the years as we've had to suffer without the light of her presence in the darkness of the cinema. So, which superhero would you like to see as a celebrity slapped into some shiny Spanx and put up on the silver screen? Think about it until next time. This is the Adaptation Station. I am your host, Kat Averill, and signing off to episode 2, Great Responsibility. Thanks for watching.